Yesterday, we told you this was the big one. This is the vulnerability that Disney does not want anybody to know they have. But indeed, they do. It's been decades in the making. The Walt Disney Company setting up pseudo-cities and municipalities, having a special district that's issuing bonds and all sorts of things, all while they operate in a rather dubious manner. It all now comes to a head in Central Florida. Billions and billions and billions of dollars on the line, and perhaps even criminal situations. Let's dive in with the experts right now. Hello and welcome everybody. Explaining entertainment, keeping you ahead of the culture curve. It's what we do each and every day here on the WDW Pro channel. Happy to have you out there. Look at you. Look how good you're looking. Just take a look at yourself in the reflection of the screen. But I've got two dapper-looking fellows as well here with us today. And they're not only here to be dapper, but they're here to help us understand better what's going on with the Reedy Creek Improvement District, that being the special district which was governing the Walt Disney Company property down there with the Walt Disney World Resort. Andrew of Legal Mindset is here. He just happens to be an expert when it comes to special districts in Florida. What a coinky-dink is that?
It's just an absolute coincidence. Who would have thought that a guy who has a YouTube channel, I've been on YouTube now for about 2 years. I never thought that my area of practice would become such a big deal. But it turns out that representing local government, specifically special districts in Florida for nearly a decade, especially representing all of the special districts directly surrounding Disney and dealing directly with Reedy Creek, actually has become really relevant nowadays. So we're going to get into it today, and I'm happy to share my knowledge with you.
It's sort of like if you were an expert on undersea couplings when it comes to oil spills. Nobody wants to hear what you have to say until the BP thing happens in the Gulf, and then suddenly you're in high demand. And I think we have a BP oil spill right now in Central Florida. Also joining us, who I'm going to lift to the top because that's where he belongs, Mexican Iron Man. Mike, welcome to the channel. You are a bit of a financial expert in ways that probably the average audience member does not know.
Well, long before starting my own accounting and tax firm, which I've had now for, God, I'm going to be approaching eventually.
Don't say it, Mike. Just don't even say it.
All right. More than a decade, less than two. But my first start in the area of finance and accounting was working for the city of San Jose. I was specifically a staff in the budget office that dealt specifically with municipal tax, municipal budgets, redevelopment, our redevelopment agency. I worked on a bond initiative, certainly had to deal with things related to this tax. I never thought that when this matter came up the way it did and watching Andrew's channel, that the way I got my career started, which was in municipal finance, budget, and redevelopment agency and bonds, which was how I got started. The first job I had, when I launched my career, was in municipal was in municipal bonds, municipal tax, finance, and budget, and the intersection between city, the private sector, and our redevelopment agency and the district that it governs. So the fact being here with Andrew, this topic, the way that this story has turned in Disney from a culture war story to the legal issues is fascinating to me.
Well, we've got it nailed on both fronts, and it's a bad day to be Disney if you're watching this video. All right, so yesterday we framed this. We set it up to explain why it is such a big deal. Of course, for those of you who have not yet seen that video, I recommend you go over there, as well as making sure that you are subscribing and following the content of both Legal Mindset and Mexican Iron Man. Although it may be hard for Mexican Iron Man, he's everywhere. But in terms of how big this is, we're talking about decades of issuance of bonds, allegedly from a municipality, but perhaps now somehow being connected to a corporation, which would, well, that would be a serious problem. We'll get into why. And then on the other side of this, also, as the Walt Disney Company is now facing more and more scrutiny into how they have been acting as the governing power when perhaps they should not have been in Central Florida, well, it is opening them to all kinds of issues that they perhaps did not foresee when they decided to step into the political realm of Florida. Now, whatever you may believe in regards to what should be taught in schools or the official curriculum of Florida to preschoolers, first graders, etc., it seems to me that this is a multi-billion-dollar decision by Disney that I'm not sure the pixie dusters out there fully understood once it started. Andrew, can you walk us through what this is all about and what is at stake?
So this is absolutely huge because not only do we have a bunch of bonds, and a lot of people ask, what is a bond? Well, a bond is like a loan, right? It's like a government loan. When the government wants to build something, whether it be a road, whether it be a facility, excuse me, a little cold here, guys. But if they want to build something big, they need money. And just like you might for expanding your home or making a large purchase, you might go to the bank and get a loan. And they're going to give you an interest rate. And they're going to say, hey, this is 10% interest or whatever else the bank is going to offer you. Now, when a government borrows money, there's two magical things that happen. Number one, they're usually offered a better interest rate. Why is that? Because it's perceived as more secure and it's perceived as a safer investment. I know, Mike, I'll bounce it to Mike to talk about those in a second, but they're given a beneficial rate, and those bonds, that loan is not taxable. So the interest on that is not taxable. The interest and principal are not taxable, so they don't need to pay taxes for that. So they go and they take that loan money, which they usually spread out over 30 years in Florida, very common, and they build stuff. Roads, bridges, stormwater, drainage, just normal stuff that gets stuff done. I know a lot of us don't see these things, but they're essential and they're in every single community in America. And they need to get built in order for people to live in a place. If you've ever lived somewhere and the water's backing up in the road, you obviously do not have good stormwater drainage and they need to spend more money improving that. So that's what they do as part of development. And Disney has taken almost $1 billion for these public purposes, except for here's the catch. A lot of those benefits are just benefiting the Disney Corporation, either solely or almost entirely. And here's the rub. When you do things for the public as a public entity, which RCID, the former Reedy Creek, did, you're supposed to benefit the people. And by the people, they really mean real people, real residents, real members of the public, not solely a single corporation. That is never the intent of government, to benefit one corporation and give benefits to solely one corporation. So now that we have at risk, not just the bonds, but the district itself, right? That has now been turned over to the state-run district run by Ron DeSantis. And we have two lawsuits involving that district, one at the state level, one at the federal level. And at stake here are potentially trillions of dollars in taxes and potential tolls, development fees that can be incurred by Walt Disney in the future. And if they mess this up, if this goes bad, we could actually see tax liens for billions or even more potentially, because they can tax them once again for anything they're building or having to do in that district. You could see liens on the Magic Kingdom. You could see liens on Animal Kingdom, the Grand Floridian, the Polynesian. All of those Disney properties can be subject to liens. And imagine if there was a foreclosure on any of those Disney properties. That is not just a economic black eye, that is a huge perceived black eye for that company and will certainly impact them in many different areas.
Now, I want to go to Mike in just a moment, but Andrew, we don't want to bury the lead here.
Sure.
This also has criminal implications. Can you walk us through that?
Absolutely. And I do plan on, right now, I am compiling a list of criminal charges that can be brought at the state level against Disney. But so I will list those and have a stream in the very near future about that. So stay tuned for that. Check out my channel, Legal Mindset, for that.
And as you described this, let me say too, it's important because people don't understand this is what we're talking about. This is the level. Everybody is sort of, they've been grabbed a hold of by these sort of partisan camps. It's hard to even imagine that Disney has its own partisan camp at this point, but it does. You know, it's kind of a pseudo-religious following. And people are like, oh, no, Disney's totally going to own Florida. Oh, no, Florida's going to own Disney. And it's like, no, you guys don't understand. We are talking about criminal issues now.
Yeah,
that is what is being uncovered as we go forward.
So there are actual misappropriation of funds statutes which can end up with people in jail for 30 years. We're talking Disney executives, potential administrators from RCID, people who, if they're discovered that they were using these funds for private purposes, they're going to go to jail for a while. They can go to jail for a while. Once again, everybody is entitled to a day in court. I believe this. Regardless of how we feel about them, they're entitled to their day of court and their proof, through a trial. But they could go to trial. They could face trial for 30 years in jail. And there's also federal charges. Now, I know some people think, well, Biden's not going to prosecute them. Well, listen, these are ongoing duties. Do you think it's going to be a Democrat in the White House forever? Even if you say, look, the next year might be this. Well, what if it turns over? What if a Republican wins? Whether it's Trump or DeSantis, I don't think either one of them is a fan of the woke agenda of Disney. And certainly if they can face SEC charges here, we're talking whether tax fraud or securities fraud.
Or both.
Or both. And that, I actually want to kick it to Mike on that, if that's okay. Because
yeah, and I think one of the things we need to talk about with the bonds, two things I want to add to the discussion before you jump into the criminal charge type of details. One has to do with, you're right. Absolutely, Andrew's right about the bonds having usually a preferred rate than what you can get out on the street on any given Sunday. The other thing about municipal bonds is that they're tax-free. That's a big deal. Okay, they are tax-free bonds. The fact that Disney may have pierced in private sector, we call it piercing the corporate veil, but there's also piercing the municipal or the state veil in terms of regulations, and that their lackadaisical attitude towards managing this has bordered not so much on carelessness, more almost on deliberate disregard. Specifically, it starts when we look at the fact that notices didn't go out. Now, I remember working on a bond initiative in the municipal level, and our city attorney told us under no circumstances, we literally had until Monday to get a packet of notices out to everybody in a certain set of zip codes. We had to go to the post office, we had to get them sent. Every resident had to receive notice. We already know from Disney in this process that didn't happen. It's a very lackadaisical, because they're like, well, why should we? It's our, we're running it like it's ourselves anyways. And how do we know they do that? How do we know that that's their attitude? Because their own CEO said that on an investor relations call that we reacted live to.
We could not believe it.
I literally, I think on the video, I literally fell out of this chair that I'm on, because when he said that, I instantly knew what that meant. From my own background, dealing with the redevelopment agency, municipal, and I'll tell you, we were walking a very thin line. We were dealing with private companies that wanted to come in at that time. We were dealing with Adobe with one initiative. We're trying to get a municipal bond initiative, and the city attorney told us in the terms of, we don't take care of this notice issue, the whole thing goes up in smoke. We have to have that separation. We have to have that notice, and they're very strict rules. Disney hasn't followed them. Now, going back to the tax situation, we have state issues in terms of laws, that there are state regulations and state law here that come to the fray. There's also SEC regulations that come to the fray. And frankly, if there is fraud, misrepresentation, or mishandling, and certainly malfeasance by the executive officers of this company, now we're talking tax fraud, because you essentially have a private company that could have issued its own bonds with its own credit rating, in terms of those bonds and its ability to get them in the open market. And let's keep in mind, Disney's credit rating is not the highest that it's been. If you look up the Disney credit rating in terms of all of the loans and all the debt instruments that it's attached to, it is not the highest that it's ever been. In fact, it's gone down and it's never come back. So if we end up having a private company that actually tried to use and manipulate the municipal bond statutes in order to get a special district so that it can get these preferred bonds, well, we definitely have corporate malfeasance on the table.
Yeah,
okay, so I want to go ahead,
one thing real quick is that, he mentioned there that statement by Iger. And look, that statement in and of itself, probably not enough evidence, but here's the thing. It's going to be used in court absolutely for sure, because it's going to be one part of the evidence, right? This case is not made or break. These cases and these criminal charges are not make or break based on just one thing, but it is a series of things when put together. When you look at Disney's actions coupled with their words, Iger's words, coupled with the way they've conducted business and what they've pursued as a business, and the behaviors they've engaged in. For example, the chief counsel of Disney, their private counsel, serving as district special counsel to the Reedy Creek district, to a government, to certify that they are different, that they are separate. That in and of itself warrants by the Florida bar an ethical violation, and certainly he would be hauled into court to testify as to these things and what his relationship here was and what the relationship was between the company. This is massive on multiple levels. This is dozens, if not potentially even hundreds of people that may have been involved especially over the decades in this process and in this essentially corporate scam.
And when one looks at the original documents as to why this district was set up and what its purpose was, we have de facto as well as de jure issues that we got to look at. Right, Andrew?
Yes, exactly. There's issues that are issues of law and issues of fact, and both of them are massive issues. And here's one other thing. Some people say, oh, well, it doesn't matter because they didn't promise to do anything specific in the original act, in the Reedy Creek Act back in the 60s. First of all, that's been disbanded, so that's kind of moot now. But you should also remember the legislative history is important in municipal law. You look at why something was done, not just the letter of the law. It's not contracts law, which is where most lawyers go wrong. Other lawyers who don't know this area of law, it's not their specialty, they look at it like a contract. And in a contract, you just look at the written words of the contract. That's not how law works. Law works is what was the purpose behind it? What was the thought behind it? In fact, that's the core of Disney's argument. Disney is arguing retaliation, right? And they're saying, oh, well, look at the words they said. That same analysis, right? And mind you, I think Disney's analysis is flawed, but that same analysis of looking at the words they said and the background, that applies to Disney too. And when they promised a city and they didn't deliver, that is very, very material to this case here, into why ultimately the corporate kingdom was broken up.
So let me explain that to the audience, because we have new viewers all the time, channels growing. So let me explain that. What happened was Walt Disney himself proposed an experimental prototype city of tomorrow, Epcot. It would, after his death, it would become simply a theme park. But the municipal powers and special district that were granted upon the belief that he would create a city, that the company would create cities, those remained. Those powers remained, and the Walt Disney Company then used those powers and controlled all of the property, essentially, put two little cul-de-sacs with mobile homes and named those two little cul-de-sacs as full-blown cities with all the powers of cities, including the power to build nuclear power plants, and all of it is a farce. Now, we're in the weeds, gentlemen, and I trust that the audience can handle that. You know, we're at a high resolution here, and that's good. But I want to bring this back just a little bit where we can view it from an aerial viewpoint here, get a full glimpse of what's going on. I'm going to toss it to both of you. Mike, you get the first shot on this one. But I need the audience to understand what kind of money we're talking about here, because so many times in the comments, you'll see people say, how long can Marvel go losing money? How long can Star Wars go losing money? And people, that is like a gnat to an elephant. And the elephant is what we're talking about right now. So let me hand it to Mike first. Let's talk about just how big this wad of cash is that is at stake for the Walt Disney Company when we look at not only the bonds, but also a century of being now taxed and treated the same as other companies, along with having far more infrastructure in place. That is now the situation they have. Take it away, Mike.
Well, I think you've got three. There's at least two, possibly three layers to this. There's the nuclear level, which is that if you just add up the bonds, we're talking $1 billion. But that's not what we're talking about. We now have to add up what is the benefit of having that special district, and the fact that so many of the amusement park properties are able to operate in, through, and from that district that it's had, which is now the Central Florida Tourism Oversight Board, by the way, which we haven't mentioned yet, but that's the new name of the board. Then you have the ongoing benefits that come from that, in terms of the fact that they are able to regulate themselves. They're their own city, they're their own district. They don't have to deal with the same requirements that Universal does. I've tried multiple times to try to calculate this. At a minimum, there's no way that this is less than tens of billions of dollars. It's easily that. I mean, easily. It's not just about $1 billion. This is about tens of billions of dollars, and tens meaning with a big, huge capital S. And I would argue probably if you look at the aggregate from the past, current, present, and going forward into the future, we're probably talking hundreds of billions of dollars. Here's the analogy that I've used with people trying to describe this financially. We know that it would be like essentially letting you be in charge of New York City, or most of Manhattan. Almost
Manhattan, absolutely. 40 square miles.
I mean, it would basically, this district is essentially more or less
and Mike, for those hardcore Disney people out there who are like, oh, Pro got it wrong, 37 square miles. I know my stuff.
Right.
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. And so the point of the matter is, if I gave you the ability to operate all of Manhattan in every single way, related to utilities, related to public, related to developing, planning, structures, infrastructure, redevelopment. I let you do whatever you wanted in Manhattan. What is that worth? Is that really only worth $1 billion? which is the value of the bonds? Absolutely not. Is it worth 10 billion? Absolutely not. I can drive down Fifth Avenue and I've already driven by, after 4 to 5 blocks, I've already driven by $10 billion worth of value of concrete and buildings, let alone the economic impact of the sales, the revenue, and the money that's moving from an operational
and the Magic
standpoint.
Kingdom itself is worth just that. I mean, there's no telling. The Magic Kingdom is probably worth,
and so when we look
50 billion, 100 billion, I don't know.
Exactly. That's why I say that it has to be at least 100 billion. And that, you know, who knows, if I had Disney's true financials longitudinally, if I could go back 50 years as well as forward and tally this thing up and do a forecast mathematically going forward, I think Andrew's right. We are probably well over $1 trillion. I think he's right. When he said trillion earlier in the stream, I sort of took a pause and I looked up at the air and I thought, you know what, maybe.
Yeah, especially if inflation.
And it's over time. You got to understand, it's not, they're losing this forever. Are they, do you think, is Disney going away despite what everybody says? You know, we're going to move to South Carolina.
They're going to move it to North Carolina.
They're going to move to North Carolina, South Carolina.
I'm here in South Carolina. There's no room to put a Disney. Trust me.
Load the golf ball up, baby.
And just chop it in half, just flip it over there. We're going to get it there. Let's, you know, even on the low end, right? If you say, okay, Disney's going to operate for 10 years, I think saying trillion is not ridiculous because all of the benefits that they've had so far, it's death by 1,000 taxes and fees that they've gotten out of over time. So do I think that this is going to be an issue for them in the trillions? Absolutely, 100%, especially considering I think they'll be there for 20 years and 30 years. I don't think Disney is going anywhere anytime soon. In fact, I think they're going to be there for quite a while.
Well, this brings up the other issue too, Andrew, which has to do with if in the event that somehow there is some kind of default or a piercing of these municipal bonds in one way or another, if there's somehow a piercing of these municipal bonds and there's some culpability and liability, well, then we've got a whole other set of issues here related to Disney, because then we're going to have payment of those bonds. If there's not immediate payment of those bonds, then there's going to be liens placed on the value of those property. And I think that's why, you know, I don't believe this is all about, this is not a free speech issue. And here's what baffles me, Andrew. What baffles me is that had they come to the table, had I been working in municipal Florida, like I did in a municipal entity in California, I was in shock that they did not immediately try to come to the table and essentially carve out a new deal for a new district. It was clear that the old one's going away. They had more than a year to get this done from the time that it was voted on to when it expired. They had the rest of the year to get this done, and they didn't. They are choosing to literally plant a flag on a woke hill and make this about a cultural battle to try to save them financially when it's really a financial battle.
Yeah, it really does strike me as more like a cult kind of decision. Don't you think, Andrew?
No, it absolutely does. And look, Mike is 100% right here. And I can say this from working in Central Florida. Look, we have Democrats and Republicans there. I was doing deals and closing districts and organizing these districts. I've created myself personally dozens of special districts with these hands, right? You know, working with extreme, like crazy liberals, people who literally believe that for every 1 acre developed, we should have 30 acres of conservation land. I don't even know how that math would work out. Right. So like if let's say you want to build a gas station, you got to go buy 30 acres of swamp somewhere and like keep that and preserve that.
Well, at the same time, they'll pave over all the wildlife habitats for solar panels. So
listen, you know, that way we look past that. Right. But you've got that and those crazy, and you've got Republicans that are as Republican as it gets, that are, you know, just out there, you know, just living their best base life. And it didn't matter. We all love money. Right. We all came together and look, I'm a good capitalist. I was like, look, we're going to do this. This is going to be good for everybody. We're all going to profit. The county's going to profit. The city's going to profit. The state's going to profit. The company's going to profit. Let's all win together. But Disney, instead of deciding, hey, let's all try to win together, they decided to take a massive L for a political point of what? To say that children should be talked to about naughty topics. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that's worth it, Disney, in the end.
Was it really worth $1 trillion? Was it really worth $1 trillion? That's what I come back to. It's insane.
I don't think it was. I truly do not think it was.
Now I want to go to something that some may use to say, well, now come on, guys. This has already been dealt with in the past legally. Now, again, we are getting a little bit into a high resolution topic here. But we want to take a look at the State versus Reedy Creek Improvement District from 1968, helping all of you out there do your homework. But again, the goal is to explain entertainment, and this is where we are. And I want to key in on a few points here. The state challenges the final judgment of the circuit court on several grounds. Again, this from 1968. Let me read this entire thing here, and then we'll get to 2 paragraphs. In the present case, we are convinced that the measures and improvements contemplated by the district are designed to encourage and develop those purposes spelled out in the enabling act. It says, however, it is obvious that to a lesser degree, the contemplated benefits of the district will inure to numerous inhabitants of the district in addition to persons in the Disney complex. And so if we go back all the way to 1968, where this was being adjudicated, where they were attempting to figure out, well, does this pass the muster? The entire basis for it passing the muster was that there would be inhabitants. Yet there are none. There are a few people who have temporary residence within the Walt Disney World Reedy Creek Improvement District, which no longer exists. And those people are all selected by the company. They live in mobile homes owned by the company. It's an entire farce. What would you say here? They escaped the ruling by setting up this ridiculous system whereby pseudo cities are being run out of double wides.
No, I think that's giving Disney too much credit there. And by the way, I just love look when WW Pro pulled up law, I'm like, oh yes, I love cases. This is my jam. This is my hood. But no, they didn't just subvert it. That's actually wrong. They are going against what they were approved to do, which is even worse and more damning. They are taking what they were told. This is what you have to do. You are required to do by the state. You must color by numbers and stay within these lines, and stepping outside of it. That's why I've been convinced from the beginning, from the get-go, if they are challenged in Florida State Court, which, by the way, Orange County threatened to do in the 80s, if they were actually challenged, they would lose. They would absolutely lose because they have fallen outside of these requirements. These are not recommendations. These are requirements. Understand this.
Legal requirements.
And let's talk about one of these too. And yeah, and I want Mike's take on this because this is fascinating to me that it's been dealt with in the past, and it's been dealt with in a highly specific manner. We key in on something that Andrew brought to my attention before we began recording. It says, accordingly, we find no reason for disturbing the circuit court's finding, that being that issuing the bonds through Reedy Creek was fine, that the primary purpose of the project funded by the bonds, again, those by the Reedy Creek Improvement District, which existed for decades and was essentially a proxy by Disney. Remember, this is 1968. The state had not had long enough to realize what Disney was up to. The primary purpose of the project funded by the bonds is public, and that any benefit to private enterprise, i.e. the Walt Disney Company, from construction of the project, i.e. the infrastructure of Walt Disney World, is purely incidental to the primary purpose, that being a public purpose, that being government. And now we know that is absolutely untrue, although the court believed it to be true, although that was how it was presented to the court. It is the exact opposite. Mike, does this put them in even more hot water?
Absolutely. And it's absolutely. And let's go back to the analogy that I drew before about Manhattan. This would be analogous to WDW Pro getting 37 point, whatever the number was, square miles of property in Manhattan. You promising that you're going to build a city, but instead you build WDW Pro Universe. And everything related to the concrete, the roads, hiring staff, hiring contractors, building everything out, how you designed everything, it ends up being an amusement park. And there's essentially 4 or 5 people, maybe 14, 15 tops, that happen to live in this. And by the way, you've appointed them to be on the board of managing this thing, and they're all friends and family or people.
But I gave them nice tiny homes, Mike. I gave them very nice tiny homes.
You gave them the best
Disney gave.
Basically, trailer parks that everyone can be proud of. Almost.
That's right, exactly.
Okay, so you gave them about a dozen of them. You put them there, and you say, "These are my residents," and then you appointed your own board. And the thing is that this is an issue that we dealt with in Santa Clara County and city of San Jose, because when we were trying to get our initiative done, we had companies like Adobe. There was another initiative that happened too when we were trying to get a baseball team to come to the local area. And these bonds really had to say, okay, well, this is how they're directly going to connect to the residents that were going to move there, or be that we either were already there or that we're going to live there with the new development that would happen in terms of residential development. And it would go, that infrastructure, as Andrew said at the top of the broadcast, would go to support that community, not how the heck do we end up funding the capital expenditure budgets for a private company that wants to do capex but doesn't want to pay for it, using market rate borrowed funds on corporate bonds that wants municipal tax-free bonds in order to get fast money, because it's easier to raise, and generally in the bond market, depending on what's happening at any given time, municipal bonds, especially if it's a good project, are a much easier project to get funded than corporate bonds. Corporate bonds there's just a lot more to it, as Andrew knows.
Andrew, I want to go into a meta direction as we begin to wrap this up. The question I have for you is, you've been covering this, I've been covering this, Valiant Renegade has been covering this, a very few other places have been covering this at this resolution. Most people have no clue that this is the big one, that this is a major threat to Disney, to its C-suite in a number of ways. How long is it going to take before we begin to see the legacy and access media and even other YouTubers and Disney bloggers before they realize this is the dragon at the gate? Because they don't get it yet.
I think when they start seeing, there's going to be a couple things that happen when access media, legacy media is going to wake up and say, "Oh man, we gotta look into this." And by the way, I think that because DeSantis just the other day, and if you watch my latest video on the adoption of our arguments, literally all of our arguments have now been adopted by DeSantis. He's keyed in now. So now, like right now.
Andrew, pause there because you're being a little humble. Is it your understanding that your videos have been sent into the governor,
that
or
is
at least
what
to his team?
I was told, and somebody told me directly, that they sent my videos to the governor's team. Now, does that mean DeSantis? People say, "Oh, does that mean DeSantis? He doesn't have time for that?" Okay, it doesn't matter. It got to one of his staffers, it got to one of his attorneys, and they explained it to him. And they said, "Oh, wow, we got him," because he parroted precisely word for word what we've been saying. So right now, I think they are scrambling on these issues. They're probably trying to call the bondholders to try to dissuade them. They're probably on the phone with Fitch and the rating agencies trying to say, "Please, God, don't downgrade us. Do not downgrade these bonds." They're saying, "Bondholders, do not declare this as an event of default. Do not file suit right now." This is a massive issue for them. They're behind the scenes. I guarantee you it is chaos inside of the House of Mouse. And when we see it, when it's really going to turn over, is when you start seeing the state case rolling and them getting W's on that, and which I think will come, other charges against Disney in Florida. I'm talking criminal charges or other separate civil charges against people within the Walt Disney Company and former Reedy Creek. Those corrupt officials, those corrupt employees, when they are exposed, which I actually believe they will be now that DeSantis is keyed in, it will absolutely be undeniable in the access media. They will have to look at these issues. They will have to examine them, and they can't hide behind First Amendment. There'll be no way to hide behind First Amendment. They'll have to acknowledge, because the cause of action will be coming from the bonds, misuse of public funds. It's not going to be related to speech. You're not going to be able to spin it. You're going to have to address this, which is when everybody will come around and ultimately see that we were talking truth the entire time, and none of us were crying wolf. We warned about this, and I warned about this a long time ago. I've actually talked about this on my channel for a while, but who's going to listen to the crazy guy in a suit on YouTube, right? Let's go over there and listen to Access Media, into lawyers and big legal experts.
Wait. Do you mean that ABC was not the proper place to get the best news on Disney?
I know it's shocking, right? It's very shocking.
They're a subsidiary.
It's shocking. It's shocking that the park blogs that receive those cupcakes are not the best place to.
That's right. Well, those are laced. Those are laced with pixie dust and broken dreams. Mike, let's find out where we can find you on this great big beautiful web. But also, as you tell us that, do you suspect we'll see anything about this at all in the earnings report coming up this week?
Wow, that's You can find me on this channel. You can find me on Valiant Renegade. You can find me on Midnight Sidge After Dark, and you can find me in almost every live stream that Andrew does.
And let me say this too, Mike, before you answer that question, because it's a hard one.
As far as, well, let me answer the question about the
yeah.
I mean, I can go there. Here's what I think. I think after the last Disney call that was done with, after the investor relations call that happened, this next call coming up is going to be incredibly controlled and scripted tightly. Any questions related to financial matters are going to be addressed behind the scenes, particularly these bonds. And I don't think it's going to come up. I honestly do not think it's going to come up this, and then I'm going to be covering it live on air.
Right.
I don't believe it's going to come up. I believe it's too early in the game, but I believe that if not the next earnings call, but the one after, one of these next two, it's going to come up. So that's anywhere from 3 to 6 months from now. I do not believe it's going to come up now, because right now they want to couch this as a free speech issue. They're going to be this call that's happening up as an earnings call. So they're more reporting out rather than taking feedback in. While there will be some Q&A questions, the Q&A, who gets to ask and what they get to ask, is going to be incredibly mitigated, more so than it's ever been, particularly because of what's happened in the last two earnings calls, the last two calls that they've done.
I fully agree with you. I think you and I will be on together.
Yes, sir.
Doing that live. And I just wanted to bring to people's attention that Mike has, he has been quite the individual working to lift up all of these truth-telling YouTube channels out there. And people just don't know all the work that you put in behind the scenes. And you do so mostly out of the goodness of your corazon. And it's amazing to watch all the things that you've done for all these channels. So thank you so much, Mike. Andrew, is this the big one for Disney? And tell us where we can find you. Is it the big one, or is it overblown? Are we blowing this up out of proportion too much?
We are not exaggerating. This is not crying wolf. This is not me being hyperbolic. This at this point is me being very pragmatic and saying, as an eternal lawyer, look, I have actually served both as outside counsel. I worked for an independent law firm when I was representing these different special districts surrounding them, including, by the way, Celebration, right, which is part of the city, which is claimed to be a city, but never is actually part of Reedy Creek. It was actually removed from Reedy Creek. So I'm not the one who's over here being hyperbolic or extreme or anything else. I'm being extraordinarily pragmatic. And after that, I actually moved as corporate counsel. And I'm saying these things, if I was the counsel for Disney, right, which is why they would never hire me, because I wouldn't be a yes man, I would tell them, you need to full stop on this, right? And they would fire me because of that, by the way. That's how corporate works.
Right. Throw the white flags up, though. That would be your advice.
I would say you throw the white flag up. Let's get a settlement on this. We are not going to win, but we can maintain some power. We can enter into a reasonable development agreement, which is legally noticed, and we can build what we want to build. Look, it's in Central Florida's interest as well to make money. We can all still make this profitable. We can still save this, but they've got to drop this argument. They've got to drop these lawsuits, and they've got to come back to the negotiation table. That's what is needed here, is a settlement, is an agreement, and just everybody to get back to making business in the state of Florida, because that's what the state of Florida is really about.
Grovel, rat, grovel, you are screwed. That is the message from all of us to you. So C-Suite, take note of it. We don't want you in cuffs. We want you to enjoy your, I'm sure, net zero carbon yachts. But until then, folks, I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. I hope you have learned. I have learned, and those are my favorites. So, folks, wherever you are out there, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.
Make sure to catch The Pro Show Thursdays 5 to 7 Eastern Time. Entertainment Explained, The Culture Curve Conquered, live with Pro and all his friends.